All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Diamond Factory. I'm Dr. Roz, your VP of Communications. Glad to be here this morning. Grateful for another day. I always say another day to get it right. And one of the things I think that we should get right as we are developing into the diamonds that we are, whether that's one, two, three, four, 5 star. If you're already 1 star, you're developing into 2 star and on. And one of the things that I believe, as a result of the fact that we are in the business of solving problems, we've heard Coach Dan talk about that. This is a solution based industry that we're in, and we have something to help solve people's problems, whether it's pain in their body, whether it's inflammation, whether it's weight, whether it's discomfort. We have something to solve their problem. But as we've heard Coach Dan teach in the past, if we don't know their problem, we can't help them to solve their problem. And one of the things that I realize that as I've come up in life is that we're not taught to listen. They didn't teach us that. People assumed we know how to do it. People would assume we would just learn it just automatically. There's no focus on it. There's no class, to teach you how to listen. In school, the focus is on your subjects, your math, your reading, your science. And listening is considered to be what just kind of a soft skill. So it's not as urgent as it is to get your academics. We're also taught with an emphasis on speaking. See, as a baby, you can't, the parent can't wait until the child speaks their first word. Now, we do want to make sure they can hear, but hearing and listening are totally two different things. So the emphasis is on speaking. When I was a kid, the emphasis was on doing my Easter speech without stumbling, being able to get in front of people. That was the first opportunity to get in front of an audience and speak. So speaking skills are emphasized while listening is, that's not something that's always developed. And then society often gives a reward for speaking, getting your word in, more than being quiet and attentive listening. And in many of the settings that we live in, people are encouraged to stand out. And that overshadows, and there's nothing wrong with standing out. Don't misunderstand me. There's nothing wrong with getting your word in and speaking properly, speaking correctly. But it overshadows the value of listening. There's such a value in a person that has the ability to listen attentively. And I don't mean just passively listening, where you can't even repeat what was said 5 minutes ago. So you weren't listening. And so oftentimes, even limited parental guidance is there on listening skills. Parents, we teach our children basic manners like say please, say thank you, but we don't teach that child how to listen. And so it's harder to break down that inability to listen, because I remember my mama, I'm old school. Do you hear me calling you? But it wasn't that I didn't hear her, right? So listening isn't always recognized. You don't always get the recognition if you're a good listener. When you're in school and your sports and even in the workplace, even in business, listening doesn't get an accolade. Listening doesn't get an acknowledgement. And then there's often a confusion between silence and listening. See, teachers will be in the classroom and say, the class is in an uproar and everybody, all the kids are talking, and they'll say, listen up, listen up. Are they telling them to listen, or are they telling them to be quiet? That's the reason they say listen up, because they want them to be quiet because there's too much noise going on. So there's a distinction between true listening and simply staying quiet. That's often lost. And that's why sometimes we get in the background, and because we stay quiet, just because you're quiet doesn't necessarily mean you're listening. And then the thing about listening is that it Active listening requires effort. It requires to be, it really requires us being focused and paying attention and being patient. And that can really be tiring. That's why some people just get tired when they have to listen a whole lot because they would rather just use their energy to talk. And it also means that we get rid of internal distractions. See, sometimes we can't listen because of everything else is going on in our head. All the other thoughts we got, all the other concerns that are going on, our own inner dialogue, our own inner conversations that are going on. So the only way you can listen to somebody, really attentively listen, is to remove your distractions and be focused on what that person is saying. And then another thing is that we really think listening is natural, but it's not. It's not the natural thing we do. If I were to open up the line today and ask you to be honest about it and say on a scale of 1 to 10, how good of a listener are you? I want you to think about that. Rate yourself. And then maybe ask somebody else because they might know how good of a listener you are better than you do. Because if you're the person that always interrupts a person before they get to a period in their conversation, or if you're the person that can't repeat what that person said, then you may be rating yourself a little bit higher than you really are. And so you might need to ask some people that are around you, how good of a listener am I on a scale of 1 to 10, and just get some feedback and see what they say. Because we assume that it's a natural skill, but it's really not, because active listening is a skill. And then lastly, underestimation of the importance. It is so important, especially in our industry, to be a good listener. So then the question comes to mind, why do we struggle with it? Why do we struggle with listening? Well, one, it requires patience. So when you think about what you're going to say next, you can't listen because we're so busy trying to get our word in, and we're already thinking about how we're going to end the conversation. I often say the best way to develop your listening skill is to have a conversation with a person who stutters. I always say that because it's taking them a moment to get it out. And how many of you have been around a person who stutters and you're ready to help them out, ready to them to you don't want to let them finish their statement. So we've got some reasons why we tend to be poor listeners. If you've been honest with yourself and you say you're not really a good listener, or maybe you're a mediocre listener, but I don't think any of us are tens when it comes to listening, because and then some days we're probably better at it than others. You know, that day that we have so much going on in our lives, we're stressed out about stuff. You know, we got stuff going on at the house, in the family, on the job, with our kids. That's probably a day you're not going to be a good listener. But then other days. So I won't say judge yourself based on that one day or that one incident, but overall, I'm going to challenge everybody. Overall, put a number to it. And then I'm going to still challenge you to ask somebody else because they can tell you a little bit more as it relates to how they perceive you as a listener. Because sometimes we think a little more highly of ourselves. But there's some common reasons that I want to get through real quick in the next few minutes why we tend to be poor listeners. Number one, we're thinking about what to say next, like I just said. And while somebody else is speaking, we're already planning our response or thinking about what we're going to say next. And so this keeps us from fully absorbing what the other person's saying. Number two, distracted minds. We're living in a fast-paced society. We live in, I call it the microwave society. We're in this technical driven world. Distractions are everywhere. That's why they got some restaurants these days. Now you go to the restaurant and you take your cell phone out and put it in a basket in the middle of the table because we're distracted. We're distracted by our texts, by our cell phones. You know, we can't talk to another person without checking something. Background noise, internal distractions, all that's going on. And this pulls us away from being fully present in conversation. How many of you ever talk to somebody and you know they're not present? Because they're looking around, they're not looking in your eyes, they're looking around the room, they're looking up in the ceiling, they standing on one leg and another leg because they're bored about what you're saying. Number 3, sometimes we're poor listeners because we have a desire to fix it. And do you know, everybody doesn't need us to fix it. They want us to hear them. Some people just need a person to be a sounding board because you can't fix everything. But sometimes we have such a desire to fix or to solve every problem. We instinctively want to fix problems as soon as we hear them. So what do? We jump in. We jumping in with advice. My husband says it all the time. If they don't ask you, his mentor told him, if they don't ask you for the advice, don't assume they want it. We jump in with advice or solutions. And sometimes what that does is that shut the person down from even expressing themselves fully because you've already shut them down. Number 4, we have emotional reactions to what we're listening to. We're judgmental. That's why some people won't share things because they feel like they're going to be judged when they share that, whatever that particular is. So our strong emotionals, our own personal opinions, our own personal biases. I was just on the call a few minutes ago, and we were talking, and we talked about the scripture that says, "Train up a child in the way it should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it." But most of us don't train up a child in the way he should go. We train up a child in the way we went. Not paying attention to who they are. They may not be going in the same direction you're going. So our own emotional, our own personal biases. And if we're triggered by something somebody says, man, we're going to react defensively. We're going to shut them down, and we're not going to listen. That's why certain cultures don't know what's going on in another culture, because we don't get along and sit down enough. That's what's wrong with our government, not listening. Right side can't listen to the left side. Number 5, when we're trying to listen, or when we should be listening, we oftentimes assume we already know. Sometimes we think we already know what the person is getting ready to say. And I'm not saying you don't. You may know the person well enough to actually know what they're going to say, but that doesn't give us the right to not listen to them, to not let them get it out. And sometimes we think we already know what they're going to say, so we stop even paying attention. We know they're lying, so we stop paying attention. We know, some of us have that spirit of discernment, so we're quick to discern, and rightfully so, because if you have that gift and they're playing a game, they're doing what they're doing, we shut them down. We do it on the phone with people that are calling us saying, buy this, buy that, all these different calls that we get. I often get the call, and sometimes I'll let them do their spiel, sometimes I won't. My problem with that is that I say, I'm not interested, and then you keep talking. And then I say, I'm not interested. I'm trying to be nice and not hang up the phone because you're not listening. You're programmed to following your script. And then number 6, self-centeredness. How many of you talk to somebody and the moment you share your situation, they got to share theirs? Girl, yeah, I went through that too. Oh, but let me tell you about my thing. No, I asked you to listen to mine. Okay. But sometimes we're so self-centered, we often view conversations from our own perspective. And if you're not walking in that person's shoes, we may not operate the same way or respond the same way. So we focus on how the topic relates to us and how we can share our own experience. And what does this do? It causes us to not fully focus on the other person. Number 7, lack of practice. You got to practice listening. I challenge you today to practice listening. Good listening is a skill. It requires practice. The more you practice it, the better you get at it. And the more you practice it, the more you recognize what is in us, in our own selves, that's causing us not to do it. Maybe it's one of these these 10 things that I'm sharing with you. Maybe you're being distracted. Maybe you realize you're ready to give them an answer. Maybe you realize you're impatient. Maybe you realize you think you know. Number 8, impatient. A lot of us can't listen just because we are impatient, because listening can feel like it's slow. And you're one of those quick, fast people. You're in a hurry, you're moving in a hurry, your brain is in a hurry, everything is fast. So you don't listen well. We're in a hurry. And so we interrupt. Or we rush somebody. Can you please get to the point? My mother-in-law, she's the kind of person, she's very detailed. And if she's going to tell you what happened that day, she's going to tell you the whole story from the morning to the night. And many of her children are like, can you go on and get to the end? Because that's where you're going. So we interrupt or rush people to get to the point. Number 9, the fear of silence. A lot of us don't like silence. If I just quit talking right now and we just silent, some of us get disturbed when there's silence. They feel uncomfortable with too many pauses. And in a conversation, there really ought to be some pauses. I challenge people often because they'll call me and say, are you busy? And keep talking. They never gave me a chance to say yes or no. They just went right past that. So did you really care? I'm busy or not, right? So you've got to make sure that you have some pauses, but don't feel uncomfortable when there's a pause in the conversation. And then number 10, our own inner conversation. Yeah, as I said earlier, there are certain days it's easier to listen than others, because sometimes we've got our own problems, our own worries, our own thoughts, our own judgments that don't leave us enough mental space to take in what the other person's saying. So when those days come, don't find yourself engaging in conversations unless you're able to deny yourself of that time that person's need. Because listening says this, and I'm done. Listening says this: you are more important than I am. What you're going through at this particular moment of our conversation is more important than anything going on in my life. So let's practice listening. Let's analyze ourselves today. Let's take an inventory and determine where we are on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being you're a great, fantastic, awesome listener, 1 meaning you're not, and anywhere in between. Today at 1 p.m., we know we have our meeting at the headquarters at 1 p.m. And then listen, have a great Akana kind of day. Bye for now.